Okay. I think we're in session 6. I should change that. Part 6, right? Wow.
Yeah, it is part 6.
I'm not, my records aren't as good as they should be, right? Oh, well, we're still in Hebrews. And I've got us on track where we are. So this is good. This is a really interesting word. A-N-O-M-I-A. Anomia. And what's really interesting about it is not found in some of the manuscripts. And when we get to it, I'll show you where it is. But, well, we'll talk about it when we get to it. But anomia is a neat word because this means anomia. This is a negative participle, not or no. And this is law. Nomia means to partial out in area, but it's interesting that the Greek law, okay, and I should mention this, okay, I think I mentioned this before, but Greek law compared to Hebrew law, right? Hebrew law is basically not the 10 words, but the Torah, right? And the Torah is a synopsis, or the 10 words, the 10 commandments, are a synopsis of the Torah. So whenever you hear the 10 commandments, it's not the 10 commandments. That's a synopsis, meaning look at the Torah, the whole Torah. But the Greeks were different. Their law was based on nomos. Nomos means to partial out, especially for food or grazing to animals. This is important because what are the 10 commandments? The 10 commandments come in. What's that?
Property. Thou shalt not.
Well, it's interesting because the first 5, or basically the first 5, are about God.
Relation to God.
And the next group are about your relationship
To others.
to people, right? That's the law. Is there anything? Well, there is something about property rights in there, right? The property rights, thou shalt not steal. Covet, steal. That's interesting that the focus of that is. But the Greek view of law is partials. Boundaries. Where can you graze your flock? What's your ownership of property? That's the focus of their law. Yes, sir?
So the Torah, was that extra tablets that Moses brought down, or was that the full, or did they take the summary, which they call the summary, and expand it to the Torah?
Remember that all ancient literature is mnemonics. All ancient literature is mnemonics, period, dot, right? So, because it's mnemonics, the ancient Hebrews believed, not the ancient, the Hebrews, the rabbis, if you talk to your rabbi, your Orthodox rabbi will tell you that they believe that when Moses came down from the mountain on the tablets of stone, he had the whole of the Torah. That's why it took 40 days. Actually, we don't know how long it took. If you remember, 40 days and 40 nights is a euphemism in Hebrew for an indeterminate period of time. Remember, you can't count above 40 because you don't got enough fingers and toes with 2. So 40, when it says 40 days or 40 nights or implies that, that means it was an indeterminate amount of time. It's very specific. It's a specified period of time. So when he was on the mountain, the reason it took so long to chip out that stone or whatever he did, right, or for God to do it, was because it was the whole of the Torah.
It's a very small font.
It was a very small, well, it's mnemonics, right? It's mnemonics, very small font. There's no vowels, there's no spaces. And if you remember what's that stone, the famous stone? The Rosetta Stone, right? You ever seen a Rosetta Stone?
Yeah.
Now, I think you might get a hernia trying to pull that sucker down from the top of the mountain. But, that's pretty fine writing, and there's 3 languages on that sucker, right? Mm-hmm. So, very interesting. But the reason we have this view of the Torah is because in the 1400s, under Rambam, Right? We don't believe that the Jews did it first. We think the Hebrew or the Christians did it first. The Christians, as an art motif, began this. And they put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, etc., right? It was an art motif. And later on, the rabbis or the Jews began putting it on their synagogues. And this is about 1400 BC, or AD. That's about as early as you find it. So it's an art motif. And this is our art motif, right? So the Jews believe, the Orthodox rabbis believe that Moses, when we looked at the Torah, this was years ago, maybe 10 years ago when I did the Torah class. In the Torah class, if you read the Hebrew, it says that Moses brought down the Torah. It says it right in the Old Testament, right in the Torah. It says Moses brought down the Torah. So there can be no debate. I know we want to debate on it, but if you there's that huge fight. There is a huge fight. I believe that the Bible is to be read as it's written. There are figurative things and euphemistic and poetical things and literary things in it. And so it is correct to read it within the context of the literary, and you know what I'm saying? There are things in there. Jesus said, rip your eye out if your right eye offends you. And I see you all have right eyes. So you agree with me to a degree, right? That there are euphemistic and figurative things within the context of the Old and New Testament. We find it all the time. In the poetry, you find all kinds of poetical things. The Lord is my shepherd. Well, I don't see him as a shepherd. That's euphemism and figurativism, right? But yet you can still take it literally within the context of the understanding. I think people get silly, right? They really get silly in the way they look at things. So in other words, it does say literally that Moses brought down the entire Torah. And it says it in the Old Testament, that fact. And that's what the rabbis believe. So, when he came down, he brought this down. But what's unique about this, and anomia means no law, without law. But nomia to the Greeks means a partial of land, and it reviews to property rights, as opposed to the Ten Commandments, which are wholly about your relationship with God and people. This is really different, especially from a Greek worldview, right? So we need to put our Greek worldview hats on. The other thing here, oh, and by the way, what do you think in a context of who's always talking about the law? Do the Greeks? No, the Greeks don't. The Greeks aren't into law. I mean, the Greeks are into law. They see law as a very, very important thing. But it's not something they see within the context of morality. They're not communists. They just see there's a natural thing, right? If I go and take your property, what should I expect? Well, you can acquiesce and just give it to me. That means, was there any law involved? No. Or you can, there's a police force, right? So if I take his cup and he cranks back and punches me, is that okay? Yeah, because the law is not in the eye of the beholder, but law is a function within the culture and the society of what you claim within your context. And that's why in the Greek worldview, the property issue is such a big deal, right? That's how you outline the property. But to the Hebrews, law is a question of a religious fundamental, or a fundamental of their culture and society, where the Greeks would say it's not. It's just the way you treat people, right? So as a Greek, because of adikia, and we'll talk about that word too, we'll get to it, but because of dikasune, right? I want to maintain a balance. So if I take his property, what have I done?
Disrupted the balance.
I've disrupted the balance between him and me and between the property, right? Because it's not mine. You see what I'm saying? The Greeks have a very fundamental view of the world that's different than the Hebraic view of the world. So when we see a word like this should peg us immediately to think Hebrew, 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 right? Where if we see this other word, which I'm going to throw out to us, hamartion. Hamartion. This is, and I give it to you right here, from hamartano, as A is a negative participle. This A is a negative participle, so that's our not, no. And martion. Martion means a section or allotment, a division or share. Literally, this means to miss the mark. So in the Greek worldview, to miss the mark that I'm aiming at, right, is their fundamental thing. This is why we translate this word as sin. And I should say, we translate this word basically, it means specifically illegal, a violation of law, no law, or a violation of law, which is right straight out. Where this one means to miss the mark. And I think the New Testament authors, being a Greek worldview, they're more concerned with with hitting the mark, right? Hitting the mark is different, and I said this before. I'm sorry I'm repeating myself. I know I'm repeating myself, but I don't want you to miss this point. I think it's really critical. To the Hebrews, it's what you don't do, right? To the Greeks, it's what you do. And I think the New Testament is pointing to us that it's what we do, right? In the sermon today, it's about what's the purpose of the church. Well, the purpose of the church is rescuing those who need salvation, right? It's what you do. That's your purpose. Because you could sit back in your church all day and worry about whether you're sinning, right? But it's not about you sinning. It's about, I don't think God's going to sit there and say, well, I know this is what we teach, but I don't think God's sitting there going, oh, well, you sinned, you sinned, you sinned, you sinned, you sinned. It's like, well, there's a person that's out there and they're struggling, right? Their arms up, you know, they're drowning in the symbol of the sermon. And so, well, I'm not going to sin today. No! Throw an anchor, throw a life buoy to the guy. Jump out and save him, right? You see what I'm saying? That's the Greek worldview. That's the worldview of the New Testament. That was kind of the problem of the Hebraic worldview, right? And although in the paper today there was an article about a book that a guy has written and trying to explain why the church was so successful, the Christian church was so successful, but the guy missed the point. If you read it, he's totally wrong. Because he said that one of the main things, the reason the church was so successful was because its appeal was to an exclusive God. And that was not, and that its appeal was also a missionary appeal. But you remember what I told you? You know this. Who was the most missionary group in the Roman Empire? You know it.
Roman legions.
No. The Pharisees. The rabbis and the Pharisees were the most missionary group. Remember, we know for a fact that they believed that one of the reasons they failed in the Promised Land, you know, back during the Old Testament period, they believed they failed and were forced to Babylon and forced to Assyria because they didn't convert the people. So in the Maccabean era, what did they do? They converted the people. They forced conversions on the people in that place, in the whole of the Promised Land during the Maccabean era. They became a huge missionary church, if you like, a missionary synagogue, a missionary religion. And they were doing their missionary best in opposition to whose law?
Jewish law.
No, the Roman law. The Jewish law was totally into it. Peter lied. Peter was wrong. When he told Cornelius that the Torah prevents me from entering your home, that was completely a lie. Either that or he was totally misguided. Because that is not what they did in that period. They were big time, the Pharisees and the synagogues and the whole of the Jewish religion were into it. What changed? This is all historical stuff. What changed? Why are they? What are they today? What kind of religion are they today? Are they a missionary religion? Not at all.
No, they discourage conversion.
By birth.
They big time discourage it. What changed? What caused them to do that? Okay, we have here's the coming from Egypt. They go to Egypt, they go to the land that was promised them, the promised land. And God told them to eradicate the people and get rid of all the other religions and stuff in it. Did they? No, they didn't. So they believed from the diaspora, and this is the Assyrian and the Babylonian diaspora, they believed from this point on that they should convert. So they're converting the world. They are converting the world, even though Roman law tells them not to. Roman law says you can't convert others. But they were doing it big time. They were into conversion. Look at Cornelius. Cornelius would have been a Jew except for circumcision. Right? The minute that Christianity, Teen Hodos, came to him and said, we offer you, what did they offer him? Judaism. We offer you Judaism. A Messianic Judaism. Christianity is Messianic Judaism. You know that, right? That's what it is. It's Messianic Judaism. The minute that Christianity, that Peter went to Cornelius and said, we offer you Messianic Judaism, you don't have to be circumcised, and what happened?
He became Christian.
He said, yes, please, and my house, right? The Jews were a non-Messianic missionary religion that was really trying to force their religion. And what changed them was two things. In 70 AD, the destruction of the temple, and then in 125 AD, the final rebellion by who's his name? Bar Kokhba. I never can remember that guy's name. I don't know why. I need to put it on my notes permanently, right? The Bar Kokhba rebellion, and what happened to Judaism? Judaism decided what? It's in their documents. It's in the Tanakh. I mean, it's in the Talmud. They wrote it out. They said it. They made a decision. The decision was based on two things. Number one, after 70 AD, I had no temple in Jerusalem, but that wasn't the defining measure. After 125 AD, I had no more temple anywhere. Because after 70 AD, I still had a temple. I had two temples. I had one in Alexandria, and I had the other one in the Essenes. We do not know where the Essenes had their temple. That may have been Masada. We have no idea. But the Essenes actually had a temple. So after 125 AD, it was the total destruction of the Jewish ability to worship. Ability to worship. The Jews cannot worship at all. Therefore, there is only one strain. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strains, right? Pharisee, Sadducee, Essene, Zealot, and Teen Hodos. There's only one that has the ability to worship today. Teen Hodos. The only legitimate strain of Judaism. That's why so many Jewish people converted during this period, and they became Christian, and, we've lost track of any kind of differentiation. That's just what happened. And Christianity redounded into the world, number one, because it looked like a mysterion, and everybody wanted a mysterion, and number two, because it appealed. But the Jewish people from 125 AD on concluded what? What was the failure in Judaism? What drew attention to them? Their missionary purpose. And they've written about this in the Talmudic documents. Because of their missionary purpose, they decided that that had drawn attention to them in the Roman Empire, and that led to the destruction of their temples, the destruction of their religion, destruction of their way of life. And so after 125 AD, they went from being a mission-based group to a non-mission-based group, and left the mission base to Tehonos. Tehonos had no destruction of purpose, because Tehonos didn't have the need for a synagogue or they had a need for a synagogue, but they had no need for a temple, because everything we're talking about in Hebrews, and that's where the connection is. So this is really important, and this is why that guy, I cannot believe that a scholar would write a book that would be so obviously wrong. I mean, he obviously, did he even study the historical records? In any case, as we look at this, this is the whole point of the Hebrew thing. And so we're at 10, and let's see, I think I went through 10, let's see, what do I have here? That's 8, 9, 10. This is what it says, and if you remember, we have gone from, we proved the Godhead of Christ. We proved that Christ is God, period, dot. That was the proof in the early part of Hebrews. Christ is God. And then we proved the priesthood of Christ. The priesthood, the Melchizedekian priesthood. He's a priest for the Gentiles. He applies to the Gentiles. He applies. So that means that the Jewish, you have to be a Jew for this Jesus thing to work. That's the question of Hebrews. Do I have to be a Jew for this Jesus thing to work? No, because Jesus himself is a Melchizedekian priest. He's a Gentile priest. So guess what? All of us, right, that are Gentiles, this applies to us. There's more to it, though, and this is a question that they got into, and the question was the covenant. Not only the covenant, but there's something a little bit deeper in here. As a matter of fact, if you listen to the 1 Corinthian reading today, look very closely at it, because it is appealing in something that the Hebraic writer, the writers of Hebrews, is going to point us to. But this is 10. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their hearts, in their minds, and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. This was a quote from Jeremiah. And this is we already did the Greek, so I'm not going to do the Greek again. But I'm going to tell you the translation. This is a translation directly from the Greek. My translation directly from the Greek that I'm giving you for each verse. Because a disposition, that I will make a disposition, make a covenant. The house of Israel amid at one time, argued Kyrios. I will give my laws into their deep thoughts and inscribe, literally overwrite them into their hearts. And I will be, in a future tense, their God, and they shall be, future tense, my people. And that's the quote from Jeremiah. So now let's move on to 11. This is a very interesting verse. No longer, and this is the NIV, no longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. And here's what it says in the Greek. And is correct, kai. They is added. And shall not. Literally, may. Not at all. Not at all. Didasko, to teach. Every man. And it's basically hekastos. It's not every man, it's every. His, autos. Polites, not neighbor, but citizen. Not neighbor, but citizen. I think it's very interesting. You know, remember in Greek, the words are very specific in Greek. There really isn't a word for neighbor, but there is a word for the people, letes, and there is a word for citizen. I think this is very interesting, because And this, the reason it's interesting is because who does this mean? Well, yeah, politis would mean Romans, but remember, what do they call themselves? Where do they, what is their meeting? They meet in a, and an ecclesia is a, yeah, it's the Athenian democracy. Now, it means in Greek, the called out, to be called out, literally to be called out to a meeting. But this is the Athenian democracy, right?
Presupposes citizenship.
Well, yeah, and who's the citizens? Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not telling you you have to read it this way. I'm just saying that this is pointing in some really interesting directions because the word politis is a citizen. They didn't use the word people. Almost always they use the word people or demi. Remember, we've seen the word demi before. Demi means your people, your group among the ecclesia. Right? Because in the ecclesia you had demis. And the demis were groupings of families. Right? So it's not a family. And it's not a group, just people in general. The word uses citizen. And so, I mean, it would point us kind of to the Roman thing, but I think it points us even more to this idea of those of the ecclesia. So anyway, just thinking about this, I mean, this could be exclusive or not.
Who is my neighbor?
I know, it's a different...
The Samaritan?
Is it possible wordplay that Paul makes such a point of using Roman citizenship when he needs to, that he was born into, and others were either born into it or you purchased it? And is it possible that perhaps here they're saying, if you're born into this, or in this case, it was purchased for you by Christ? Is that, am I way off base here?
No, I think, let's not call it a wordplay, but let's put it in this focus. Okay, to the Romans, right, we have our Romans, we have our Greeks, we have our Egyptians, we have our Hebrews. And then we have Teen Hodos. We'll put it up
We're
here.
speaking Greek, correct?
Huh?
We're speaking Greek to all of these people.
We're speaking Greek to all these people are speaking Greek, and we're speaking Greek to all these people. To the Romans, what's citizenship? Politis is Roman citizenship, right? Paul says right on. So that's a Roman citizen. Roman citizen. To the Greeks, what is it? It's whatever the focus of the participation of their land, right? Their lands are different. But what do they all ascribe to? Even if they don't say it, they all ascribe to the Athenian democracy, right? Because the Athenian democracy gave them the greatest freedom. Really, knowing there's an Athenian democracy, do you really want to be in Sparta? Or Thebes? Or Macedonia? I just saying. You know? Yes, sir.
Just a question. From my understanding of Roman culture at the time, citizenship wasn't just because you were born in Rome. You had to participate in military service, and there's things expected of you before you could be declared a citizen. Is that right with what you've heard? You could be born a citizen of Rome if you're, and we don't know some of the details of some of this. We know that if, like, for example, you were a Roman citizen in standing, that if you had children with a non-Roman citizen, you could declare your children Roman citizens. We're not sure how far that went, but we believe that was a normal process. But you could say, I don't want those brats to be Roman citizens, right? It was a choice because you were giving them an exclusive choice. Now, if there were two Romans that were married, as I understand it, the children were considered Roman citizens right off. Now, you could buy Roman citizenship. It was a purchase thing, right? There wasn't a naturalization process other than through purchase, and that was what apparently Paul or his family or his father did.
Or
right?
service as a soldier.
Service as soldier is interesting.
In this time in the Roman Empire, you could not be a member of a legion unless you were already a Roman citizen. You had to be a citizen first. Now, the Greeks were a little different. In the Greeks, to become a citizen in full right, you had to have served in their military. We know that of the Athenians. We believe that's true of the others too. Spartan, okay, all right, it's a rabbit hole. But anyway, so when you were born as a potential Greek citizen. When you were so many years old, you went into military service. You served until you were 30. When you came out of military service, you were considered a full right citizen, free man, and then you could marry, you could own a business, you could own property. But until then, you could not. You could not own property, you could not marry, you could not father children by their law. That was Greek law, as far as we know.
Ben-Hur, didn't he adopt?
What's that?
In Ben-Hur, he adopted.
Yes.
He became a Roman citizen.
You can, that was part of that thing where if you were a Roman citizen and you had a child by any process, right? I mean, you could father a child. See, we have a really, it's like our perverse view of marriage and sex, right? In the ancient world, marriage is sex and sex is marriage. Makes it simple. I mean, that's just the way it is. Once you had sex with a person, you are now responsible for them and their offspring and for everything, unless you paid, a prostitute or bride price. I mean, that's the way the world works. So, I mean, that makes it simple, right? We wouldn't have all these problems if every kid on college campuses were required to pay a bride price or take care of those that they made pregnant. I mean, there would be no issues, right? But we have perverted that. Likewise, in the citizenship model, it didn't matter within the context of both lineage and in a family. For example, in a Jewish family, like Joseph, right? It didn't matter where the child came from. I could pick an urchin off the street, right? Like Ben-Hur. And I could say, I accept you into my family, and then I can write out a script petitioning that person to be a Roman citizen. Just like my children, right? If I have children with another person of a different group, not a Roman citizen, I could write a letter that's saying that person, I accepted that person as a Roman citizen and as my child. You see what the point is here? I mean, it's really, really cool stuff. Now, no nation in the world allows you to come into their nation not being a citizen and have children and drop them off and they become citizens. That's never been acceptable in history of any kind. But anyway, that's another question, isn't it? But to the Greeks, the whole point of ecclesia was your membership and your citizenship, right? And it was very complicated, right? But using that word implies what? You achieved. You're a citizen of it. The Egyptians, likewise, you're a citizen of Alexandria. And guess what? Alexandria was what culture, what nationality? It's Greek. It's Greek. Well, what do you think they're following? Greek law, right? So in their worldview, it's the same. It's the same. Okay, now I've got the Hebrews. In the Hebrews, how do you become a Hebrew?
Circumcision and having the law.
Your mother's son.
Your mama, right? Your mama. So the girls are automatic. All the girls, you notice that? The girls don't have to do nothing. That's positive. You're born. But the boys, what happens with the boys? They have to be circumcised on the seventh day, and they have to be declared by the father and named. You see that? That's why Jesus, of an unknown antecedent, right? Son of God, Joseph could claim that child as his child no matter what the patronage was, what the parentage was. Anyway, that's through birth specifically. In any case, the use of those words then what does Teen Hodos do with them? How do I become a citizen of Teen Hodos?
Believe in or baptized?
Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. I need to go through they would do catechism and then baptism, right? The learning process. And you notice what they say. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least to the greatest. In the Greek, and they has added, may not at all didasko, teach, not every man, every, hekastos, every, his, literally autos, it's a generic, poleta, citizen, and every, not every man, every, hekatos, his adephos. This is the most beautiful word in the Greek language. Brothers of the same womb. Offspring of the same womb. Who's the offspring of the same womb? This is a code word. All right? Used by whom? Teen Hodos. Teen Hodos use this to apply to, that's why, if you notice, we even use it today. Why do we say, hey brother, right? In the church. Hey sister, right? You especially see this in the South. You saw it in England, right? Brothers. And the monks, brothers, sisters. Why do they consider themselves that way? Because this is a holdover in the New Testament that comes right out of the Teen Hodos concept. His brother, his adephos of the same womb, saying Lego, not just saying Lego. Geshinko, know the kurios. For, and literally it's not for, it's because, hote, all, pas. Idio shall not know, but see me, literally me, from apo, the least, the micros, until, and the is added, until megas. From micros, and it doesn't have the, it's not the least, it's from least to greatest. From least to greatest. The assertion there isn't that they are least and greatest, but rather what? Their knowledge, their seeing of God is least to greatest. In other words, all right, we've talked about this before. Remember in Hebrews, and it said in Hebrews that you know God because of the expression of God, right? Because God showed himself through Christ. So therefore, we see God. The guys who saw God the greatest were the apostles and the 500 that saw his resurrection and saw him and knew him on the earth, right? Those are literally the greatest. The least are those who have the least seeing of him. They heard it from, Dave told them, right? Or Daniel told them, or you told them, right? You told them. But yet, what is the expectation from the Hebrew writer? That as they learn, and the reason they're learning is because I don't have to tell you anymore. I don't have to teach you because you see it. And here's the translation. And not at all they teach everyone their citizens, and everyone they're of the same womb, their siblings, arguing. I know the kurios, because every single thing shall see me off small until big. I know it sounds a little confusing, but you see the point here? It's not necessarily saying that the greatest to the least or the least to the greatest person, but rather through your knowledge, right, in Christ, in Teen Hodos, it will grow within you. You don't need to, what's the word? We teach to understand the principles, right? But I tell you all the time, all I'm trying to show you is what does the language say, what does the culture say, what does the history say? And then you ask me all kinds of cool theological questions, and I'll answer the historical theological questions, But what do you think I want you to do? Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to put myself on the level of Paul, but Paul would say, think about it, right? The important thing in our view, the Greek worldview, is we take this data in and we use it in our brains, right? And that's the whole New Testament thing. That's hitting the mark. That's the difference between standing in the boat watching somebody sink, right? And saying, I'm not going to sin today, and jumping in and saving them. You know, kind of like Jesus' thing, right? They said, is it okay to jump in a well to save, an animal or save a person? And Jesus said, well, yeah, duh, it's in the Talmud, you can do it. I mean, didn't you read your Talmud, basically, is what he says? Yeah, right? So even if you're sinning by doing work on the Shabbat, right? The important isn't the sinning, the important is hitting the mark, right? And I don't think there's a problem there. I think that example is perfect because in the Talmud they said it's okay to break Shabbat to save life. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I just need to go back. This Adopus, you said brothers of the same.
Yeah.
I would think it'd be almost like brothers from another mother. Why would it be the same spiritual?
Well,
Because they're not from the same womb.
the word in Greek, brothers, means from the same womb. It is a uniquely exclusive word. In other words, in English, when I say brothers is just a primary source word in English, right? So you could be my brother. You could be my brother of another mother. You could, my brother, I had a brother. My brother died, but he was my real brother, right? In English, we're euphemistic. In Greek, can you be that way?
No, it's also from the woman's side, not the man's side.
Well, whether it is or not, the big point here is, in Greek, can I be your brother, Adelphus? No. It's a paradox. Oh yes, it's a paradox. It's just like the word for love, right? Right? Agape. Can I agape? Never. I could never agape in my dreams. Can I be agape? Maybe. Maybe. I mean, would the Greeks say you could be agape?
Only the gods could. Yeah.
Only.
The gods could love you.
Oh.
But the Greek gods probably wouldn't.
Yeah. Remember, their focus, see, our focus is 2,000 years of God loving us, right? But the Greek gods did not even give a care about them. Remember? The Greek gods, in the worst cases, I mean, they were like treacherous, nasty deities, and they didn't care. There was no love. Now, could the Greek gods love each other and hate each other and everything, right? That's agape. Agape is a God thing, not a human thing. So it's a paradox. It's astounding. And see, and I think we've diluted this. We have diluted this way too much in the church, big time. Because the paradox of the ability to agape assumes that you and I are gods. And the responsibility, you see, the Greeks would understand that responsibility.
The Mormons like it too.
Well, I don't care about the Mormons because they have no reality in it. The reality is, if you're a Greek god, what is the big deal to the Greeks about a Greek god? Do you love them or hate them? You stay away from them. They're hagios, remember? They're so awful that you dive on your face, right? And so this is like you know how when people have horrible, abusive parents, and I think a correct response to that is, I don't ever want to be like my parents. So you work your whole life to not be like your parents. And then some people say, well, I end up being like them anyway. But the point is this, that when you see a negative example, I think Paul is telling us this, that the writers of Hebrews are telling us this, The point is that the Greek gods were so horrifically terrible that even if we are like gods, what does then that make us responsible to do? To use the powers we have to hit the mark.
Make better decisions.
Yeah, because our decisions are based, and here's the thing. I'll have to mention this to you because I want to quote this in Jeremiah. This quote comes from Jeremiah, and it says, it's Jeremiah 31:34. I'll just read the 34 because we read the whole thing last time. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. What's interesting is that's not what the Greek says. The Greek says, it says, know the Kyrios, for all shall see him. See him.
First-hand knowledge.
Yeah.
It cannot be second-hand.
And that's the translation from the Septuagint, right? To see him. Now let's go to the next verse. Let's see, that's 12. The next statement. I hate this verse thing. I was trying to think of words. I think I was dreaming about it. I was trying to think of a way to talk about this without talking about verses and sentences, because there are no sentences. There's no verses. You know, they just are their pieces, but we've got them in these verses. So anyway, it helps us find our place. 12. This is the NIV. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. That's the NIV. Here's what it says in the Greek. Hote, because I will be, and literally that is I will be, esomai, I will be merciful. Literally, helios, cheerful, cheerful. And the word in Greek, okay, this is really cool about Greek. The word is concrete. Okay, I can be cheerful. I look like this, right? And I tell you, I'm cheerful. The Greek word, though, implies, or doesn't imply, the Greek word is the look. In other words, it means to be attractive. In the Greek worldview, people weren't beautiful, and it's really funny because the Japanese don't have a word either. The Japanese really don't have a word for beautiful. They have a word for cute, and it's the same as pretty as kawaii. So you can be cute, you can be pretty, and it's really an astounding thing to call you that. But it basically means that you don't have to be beautiful, you just have to be cheerful. So, remember our word for grace, right? In Greek, charis is a greeting. If I greet you like this, that's the same as this meaning. Helios. And helios, what do you think we get from it in English? Huh?
Hilarious.
Hilarious. Yeah. It's not merciful. There is a word for merciful in Greek. It's not merciful, it's cheerful, as an attractive to their unrighteousness. Adikia, literally injustice. Adikia, injustice. And their autos sins, harmantia, their missed the mark. And here's what it says in the King James. And their anomia, violation of laws, will I mimesko, I will not recall to mind no more. And literally the word is eti. I will not remember it still. Literally of time or degree. And here's the translation. Because I will be cheerful, as attractive, that their injustice and their miss the mark and their violation of laws, I recall to mind, not ever still, not ever again. Listen to what God, this is what God is saying from the Septuagint. It says, because I will be cheerful, and by the way, you could translate that to be, I will be charis, right? Charis, that their injustice and their miss the mark, I recall to mind, not ever again. Now, what I want to point, some of the manuscripts don't include kai autos onimia. Some of the old manuscripts, and I won't say old manuscripts, some of the manuscripts don't. So the NIV cut that out, by the way. But if you notice, the author at least, okay, let's assume. Now, what could this point out to us? If I have old documents that have, some have that in it, and some documents don't have it in it. What could that mean? Remember what I told you right at the beginning? Who's most interested in anomia?
Jews.
The Jews. Who's most interested in hamartia? Hamartia.
Greeks.
The Greeks. If I'm writing to the Greeks, what am I going to use?
Mark.
If I'm writing to the Jews, what am I going to use?
I know.
And it's really interesting that we find some of the ancient manuscripts are excluding this one. Now remember, this is the book written in our remember, we don't have a title, right? We added the title, but it says at the beginning it was written for the Hebrews, right? Pros Hebreus. The thing that's very interesting about this is I might have some manuscripts that left this off because they didn't see it was important. Because, like I said, the big deal here, and I think this is important for us. I'm sad that they excluded it from the NIV because I think we have a problem with this. The problem, the authors, I think, originally included both because they were writing generically to all these groups. And they knew that there was a group that was really concerned with not following the law. But they also realized exactly the image that I gave you. You could take a Pharisaic view of the law and say, I'm not going to do anything because I might break the law. Right? I mean, you literally could take that viewpoint. The whole viewpoint of the New Testament, and I think the whole viewpoint of the Hebrews, the document we're looking at, is that your purpose is to do. Your purpose is to, if you don't pull the arrow back and aim it and shoot it at the mark, are you ever going to hit it?
Nope.
So you can sit there with your arrow, in your quiver, and your bow unstrung, and you can live your whole life and not break a single law. But from the Hebraic viewpoint and the New Testament viewpoint, I think somebody would be very unhappy with you. And your parents would probably be very unhappy with you too, just saying. But in any case, I think this is really important, and I think that this shows that the manuscript itself in the ancient times may have been, when they put out the versions, they may have put out a specific version for that applied more to Hebrews than the others. Now, we don't see much of this, right? So it's also possible that they dropped it, or that some manuscripts could have dropped it. But I think it's important to note these things. You know what I mean? It's not like they come out of the blue, right? When you see something like this, there's no reason. And by the way, if you look in the notes for your NIV, you'll find that it mentions this. 13. This is the end of 18, by the way. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. That's the NIV, but this is what it says in the Greek. In that, he lego, a is added, a kanos, a new covenant is added. A new, he hath made, it's paleo, to make, passively to become, worn out or declare obsolete. The word paleo means to make worn out, or to declare obsolete, or to become obsolete. The protos, the foremost, old is added. Old is added. Now, it's not now, it's but, it's day. That which is added, decayeth, paleo, literally made worn out, and waxes old is garasko, to sentient, literally to biologically age. Is added, aegis, near. Literally, aegis means, remember, near enough to throttle? Literally, that's what it means. Aegis means that a person is near enough for me to grab your neck and throttle you. To aphanismos. Aphanismos means to disappear, to make a disappearance. Here's my translation of the Greek. He argued new, he argued new, in that he declared obsolete the foremost, but that he declared obsolete and biologically aged, near enough to throttle, disappeared. The word old and new are not in there. Here's a translation from the NIV. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. I'll give you, this is a synopsis. Here, I'll read it again. He argued new in that he declared obsolete the foremost, but that he declared obsolete and biologically aged, near enough to throttle, disappeared. And here's a paraphrase of this. Although the first was near, it disappeared. Although the first was near, it disappeared. In other words, the first is near. Why?
Is that the first covenant?
Yeah. The context is the covenant, although the covenant was added, by the way, to this. But the first was new. The first was new, but it disappeared. The first was near. I'm sorry. The first was near. Okay, remember, what was John the Baptist? What did John the Baptist say?
Kingdom of God is
Basically, yes, here. And the word is near, aegis, near enough to throttle. Right? In other words, it's right here. What did Jesus preach?
It's here.
The same thing. The kingdom of heaven is here. All right? So, when Jesus came, everything in the old covenant, everything, right? The kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth were here. But because of Jesus, what happened? This is a really huge statement.
That covenant's no longer valid.
No.
No,
It's been superseded.
They're the same. Yeah. See, we use words like superseded or transform may be better. Transform is probably a really good word for this. It basically here's a
Heaven
Greek.
on earth.
Greek. Okay, Greek. You see this? I can see it. I can almost read it. I can read it. But as it comes nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer, what happens? I can't read it. I can't see it. It blocks my sight, right? In other words, it's here. The covenant that Jesus Christ brought is the same as the old covenant. It's just now they are all together. As a matter of fact, this is the end of 8. And remember, they're talking about the covenant. It's not that the old covenant's gone, right?
right, because Jesus said that wasn't going to happen, that it was not going to pass away, or
It's because of the action of Christ that the covenant is now the same covenant. And as we look at 9, because 9 is going to, you remember, every time we get a new chapter, it's supposed to be a new change. So let's watch that new change and see what happens within that context. Because I think you'll be amazed at the way the authors work this. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray, amen.